Hey, and welcome back to Coast to Coast. I'm George Norrie here in the Midwest with Hank Wesselman. Hey, do you get power outages much in Hawaii?
We do. You know, we have them all the time. So welcome to the club.
Well, I've got generators there too, but these are big ones here in the Midwest.
Yeah. I didn't know you were in St. Louis. I thought you were in California.
Yeah. Well, I am. Most of the time I'm in Los Angeles too. So, you know, we have designed these studios to be ready for just about any kind of inclement condition. And, you know, the only good thing about this is the first time, Hank, in 8 years that I've been broadcasting here in the Midwest portion when I come and do the shows, that these things have had to kick in to keep me on the air. And as much as it may seem aggravating because you don't know how long they're going to last, and I think they'll last for the whole show, it's kind of nice to know they work.
Yeah, well, let us pray.
All right, back to our shaman, back to the bowl of light. First of all, why'd you call it the bowl of light?
Well, this was a metaphor that Makua used to talk about the fact that at the beginning of life, each one of us receives a spiritual spark which comes to us from our higher self. And that spiritual spark is kind of like a hologram in the sense that it contains within itself everything which is recorded in our higher self field and our oversoul field. Now, in giving us the bowl of light, you know, he told us a very interesting story. He said, you know, each one of us comes in with this bowl of light, but that light is diminished as we live our life because every time we step into the negative polarity, every time that we injure somebody with our words or our thoughts or our deeds, or we take something that doesn't belong to us, you know, every time we step into the negative, it's like you put a stone in this bowl and some of your light goes out. Now, this was a metaphorical way of talking about a very real phenomenon. And he paused and he said, you know, one of the major problems in the world today is that the world is being run primarily by men whose bowls of light are filled with stones, and there's no light in these people anymore, despite what they may profess to be so. He said, hopefully we get to a point in our life where we realize what we're doing before it's too late. And he said, you know what you do then? And, of course, my wife and I are just hanging on every word. And so he took this wooden bowl and he turned it over. And he said, you just dump it out. And, of course, this was a big laugh shared by us all, you know, sort of releasing the tension of the moment. And he said, but from that time forward, we lead our life differently. And it's at this point that we become what he called spiritual warriors. Now, he used the word warrior with deliberation because, as I told you, he was a military warrior for much of his life. But he was also kahuna on both sides of his family, both his mother and his father. And so he carried this body of knowledge and this level of spiritual responsibility, which came to him through his ancestors. And so he said, as spiritual warriors, we walk a very narrow path, which is constrained by 3 sacred directives. Now, he called them kapus, K-A-P-U. A kapu is something which is sacred or restricted or constrained, or in this case it meant a directive. And he said there are 3 sacred directives that we have to live our life in alignment with. And he said the first of them is you have to love all that you see with humility. Now he tells me this, and I'm thinking to myself, boy, easy one first. And, of course, in his clairvoyance, he picked up immediately my thought. He started to laugh.
Well, wait, but when you say love what you see, I need you to understand that a little bit more. Would that even be if you see your enemy?
That's right. It means that as you pass through life and you encounter people, events, and places, you must come from that place of aloha. Because it's only in the positive polarity that we can really achieve a successful outcome. We virtually never are able to achieve a successful outcome if we're in the negative polarity. But that's where we learn our lessons. The second kapu was, he said, you have to live all that you feel with reverence. Now, he used the term reverence with deliberation as well. In this case, it means an active respect for everyone and everything that you encounter in life. It's what Joseph Campbell meant when he said you have to follow your bliss. And if you follow your bliss, you can't go wrong. So we have to live what we feel with respect, with reverence. And for indigenous people, this is the foundation stone for indigenous mind. The foundation stone for indigenous mind is respect. And so I looked at him and I said, what's the foundation stone for Western mind? And he laughed and he said, oh, the foundation stone for Western mind, which is the same as colonial mind, is dominion, domination. And, you know, if you cast an informed glance over the last 2,000 years of history, you can see this is a very accurate perception.
Oh, he's right.
The third kapu, we must know all that we possess with discipline. And in knowing what we possess, that includes what possesses us. And this is how you find your self-discipline. So this was the path on which he walked, and it was a very simple but very complex teaching, the path of humility, reverence, and self-discipline through the act of loving, living, and knowing. This was the central teaching that he came from. And so, as I've said, you know, he gave us this wonderful bowl, and that bowl travels with me now, and it holds a candle in the center of each one of my circles when I'm teaching.
Well, Hank,
and centers again.
If somebody practices these three directives, what happens to them? What do they accomplish?
Well, they step up into what he called the spiritual hierarchy. Now, he had a very interesting perception about who we are as well as where we are. And in his words, in order to experience authentic initiation, you have to know who you are, as well as where you are. And in knowing who we are, he said, you know, in the Western world, you have a monotheist perspective. In the Western world, there's only one God, you only have one life, and you only have one soul. But in the indigenous world, we know that we have many lives, that there are many gods, and we have many souls. To be precise, we have three. Now, this was also part of his central teaching, that each one of us possesses not one, but three separate souls. And that seed of light that comes into us at the beginning of the life is one of them. That is the spark of your spiritual soul that resides within you throughout your life, sustaining you. Now, the interesting thing about this story is that in looking at the reincarnational perspective, he said, at the beginning of life, we receive this bowl of light from our oversoul, from our higher self, the immortal aspect of ourselves. And when it enters the physical body, it encounters a distinct and separate soul, which is already in residence. This is the body soul, the physical soul, that we received from our mother and our father. In his perspective, in the same way that the gametes, the sex cells, contain a genetic template from the mother and a genetic template from the father, which at fertilization creates a new template, a new pattern, which eventually becomes ourselves. There's also an energetic spiritual template, which contains all these ancestral imprints from the mother's side of the family and from the father's side of the family. And so when this incoming seed of light enters and takes up resonance within us, it encounters this distinct soul which is already in the body. This is what some people call the energy body. And it reveals that our energy body actually comes from three sources, not two, from the mother, from the father, and from our spiritual higher self. Then, in response to life as we live it, the third soul comes into being. The third soul is what Freud called the ego and what Jung called the conscious mind. But Makua referred to these separate aspects of the self as souls because in his perspective, they all come from the same source, but they exist in very different states of quality. How they function and how they come together to create the self is essential in experiencing the experience of authentic initiation. And this is where our talks began. This is where the bowl of light really takes off. This book about our extraordinary talks over the last 8 years of this Kahuna's life. Now, I might just say for your listeners who've read books about Huna, this is not a book about Huna. Huna is a largely non-Hawaiian system with kind of a Hawaiian overlay to it that was created essentially by outsiders. This book, The Bowl of Light, is really the first book derived from the authentic knowledge of the Kahuna mystics of Polynesia, which is distinctly non-Western, which is distinctly Kahuna. And so it's really quite unique. So over those years, we discussed all sorts of interesting light topics like the nature of the self, the nature of reality, the nature of the ancestral grand plan. And during this time, there were those mystical experiences, like the time he took me to a site of a volcano called Mauna Kea, which you know well. Mauna Kea, in the Polynesian perspective, the great mountain in the center of the island of Hawaii, is considered to be the mountain of vision. It's the most sacred mountain in Polynesia, and the entire mountain is a temple. The scientists didn't know this when they built their telescopes on top of it, but then they didn't ask either. Makua was very forgiving because he was always in that place of aloha. And he just sort of said, well, the scientists are kind of passing through. And, their time has come right now, but their time will pass, and then the mountain will be there forever. So he took me to the side of this mountain, up to about the 9,000-foot level, to a crater which he told me is a direct entryway to the mythic lower world of the shaman. This was an extraordinary experience because he wanted me to have an experience there, and I did. And it's recorded in that chapter in the book called Speaking Woman. I don't know.
No, I didn't see that part, but what did he mean by the lower world? To me, that sounds kind of dark.
Well, the shamans all over the world perceive the spirit world in very much the same way. They see it as being made up of three great cosmic regions, which are collectively thought of as the lower worlds, the middle worlds, and the upper worlds. Now, the middle world is where we are right now. We're in the middle of the stack. And the middle world has two different aspects, the world of things seen and the world of things hidden. The world that we go into when we dream at night